My guest today is Dr. Amrita Bahl, Chief Education Officer at the GD Goenka Group, where she leads innovation in pedagogy, curriculum design, and academic strategy across its institutions. An alumna of Columbia University, Amrita is also a certified climate reality leader, where she was trained by Vice President Al Gore and his team. Over her two-decade career, Amrita has championed transformative initiatives, including working alongside Dr. Kiran Bedi, India's first woman IPS officer, to pioneer peer-led health education programs in Tihar and Amritsar prisons. Amrita and I have met twice before, and I know this one conversation will never fully capture the depth of her extraordinary path. Without further ado, let's dive in to uncover what fuels her impactful. A very warm welcome to Atlanta Diaries, Amrita.
Thank you so much, Enma. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here today.
Lovely. You told me that your grandmother played a huge role in the person that you become today. So talk to us about your early years and how did that shape your journey?
So I want to begin by, kind of setting the context over here. So I grew up at a time in India where joint families were a common feature, right? So I've spent a lot of time with both my grandmothers. But my maternal grandmother has had like a much stronger influence on my life as compared to my dadi, my paternal grandmother. So they grew up in Lahore. Both my grandparents, they got married while they were in Lahore, and the partition really affected them. And the stress of that partition took a toll on my grandfather's health, and he passed away when my grandmother was very young. So she was, I think, all of 30 when she became a widow, and she had 6 children and 5 gorgeous girls of those 6 children. So she had to raise them. And because of partition, because they just transitioned to India and they had limited means, but I think what she gave as wealth to her children was this very strong sense of ethics and integrity. And she also taught them how to always learn to treat people equally and with respect. And I think that's the background with which my mother, when she became a mother, she imbibed those values in us. So my mother got married into a family which was a typical conservative business family in Delhi, where, the women and girls led a very sheltered life. Like the convention was that you turn 17, 18 and you get married. And there was no question of studying further. In fact, from both sides of the family, I'm the first girl to have an advanced degree, like a PhD. So when I turned 18, my mother had by that time decided that, her daughters are not going to go through that same thing. So we had to break away from that convention. And there were small, small steps that, they had to take to kind of help build that base for us to be able to spread our wings and fly. And in my case, the spreading of wings and flying was like next level. I'm going to narrate a very interesting incident that will kind of give you a glimpse into my grandmother and the person that she was. So she's a very independent woman. We used to keep begging her, come and stay with us, move in. You're growing older. We would love to take care of you. But she would have none of that. She wanted her independence. So we used to visit her very often. She lived pretty close by to our place. And so I was visiting her one day, and in the evening, she just looked at me and she says, have you ever used the public transport? I think I was all of 10 or 12, and the expression on my face said, like, incredulously saying that, really, do you think I'll be allowed to use public transport? So she just looks at me and she smiles. She says, guess what? Today I'm going to drop you back using public transport. So, on the one hand, I was palpitating, thinking, oh God, we're doing something that my father will never agree on, and he's going to be very upset about it. And on the other hand, there was this thrill of doing something different, daring. Right? So it was a short ride, but that 2 or 3 stop ride kind of, helped me to experience something that I had normally not experienced. An incident that I still remember to date. So when we reached home, I was very apprehensive because I knew my father would get upset. Yeah. And I was wondering, how is she going to handle this? And so we were walking down from the bus stop to our residence, and by the time we walked in, my father was, waiting for us, and he expressed his displeasure to my grandmother. And I thought my grandmother would say something and, to apologize. No, she just stood her ground. And she said, you know what? This is important for the girls. They need to know what is normal, right? You can't always have them lead such a sheltered life. So that was something, she kind of sparked me on this journey. And I think since then, I have been kind of doing things that are unconventional. So another incident where, her practical approach to life. So I remember when I was dating my ex-husband, he was not from the community. So naturally, my father's family, being a conservative family, brought up this whole thing on community. And I used to be very upset about it, saying that, I don't understand. I mean, he's from a well-to-do family, everything is right. So what's the problem? Just because he's not from the same community cannot be a reason why we can't get married. And so, she decided to speak with my father. And she had a very reasonable, like a very, measured conversation with him, saying that, look, what are you looking for in someone for Amrita? You're looking for someone who's from a good cultured background. I can vouch for that family. You're looking for someone who's well settled and who can take care of your daughter. And I can assure you that this family will. So what more are you looking for? So when my father said, oh, but he's not from the community. So she says, but you know what? My daughter also got married outside the community. So observing her talk like this, observing her, kind of take a stand, these were the things that she kind of imbibed in me.
Thank you, Amrita. Thank you for sharing. This is really going to help a lot of people understand. You can find support, mentorship, guidance from anyone at any age, irrespective of, background, education. And talking about partition, I don't know if I mentioned last time that my dad also moved from Pakistan. And just a few years back, I got him to create his memoirs so that he can leave that story or that legacy for his grandkids. So again, I see resonance there. Amrita, I'm going to shift gears. You've taken a very unique career path, right? From officer on special duty with the Lieutenant Governor to pioneering health education in prisons to shaping education in Bhutan and now the custodian of the GD Goenka University. What was that why behind these choices?
You're right. My career has been very unconventional, but I think a common thread across the board has been that it's been a very meaningful career. I think what has been very attractive to me and what helps me decide on any assignment that I take is whether it requires courage, whether there's innovation involved, because I'm a lifelong learner. I thrive on learning. I thrive on human interaction. And for me to really succeed in anything that I do, I have to be super passionate about it. That, along with my deep desire to make an impact on people and to make an impact on society, is what drives me to choose my assignments.
So I'm going to start with the prison experience. Okay. And in fact, I just finished watching the movie and it's absolutely unbelievable. So share that thought process. Like what got you to embrace these kind of experiences is the thought which comes to my mind. So I think the prison experience was courtesy my mentor, Dr. Kiran Bedi. She completely inspired me. We were both in New York at the same time. She was serving as the director of peacekeeping at the United Nations headquarters, and I was finishing my second master's at Columbia University. So I'd written Sehat as part of my master's thesis, and I went up to her saying that I want to do this in India because I feel that there's a need for this in our country. And, she was sitting with me and she says, why are you not doing this in the prison system? So I got thinking. I went back, spoke to my advisor at that time, and he was like blown away with that idea. So I went and I started that process. And really, Enma, right from the stage of starting those conversations to try and get permission, because prison is not something that you can work in easily, whether it's in India or overseas. I remember meeting with different people in the prison system, whether it was the chief medical officer, taking advice on what all could I do to expand it into a community peer health education program. And while I was having these interviews, while I was meeting people, a lot of my worldview was changing. And I realized at the time, prison for people who are as cocooned and sheltered as I was a different world. I don't know whether I remember telling you, but I ended up meeting some interesting inmates who belonged to the same strata and belonged to the same society, that we are a part of. And it made me realize that, there's a very fine line. Anything can happen to anyone. Anything can happen to anyone. And following the law is so dependent on your own emotional regulation to be able to kind of, not cross that line over. Yeah. So you went there with a certain agenda and a certain mission, right? To impart
Mhm.
education in the prisons. Is that the right way to
Yes,
put it?
yes.
But I'm sure you must have come away with a lot of learnings, grown as a person.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, it was a transformative experience. But one of the deepest things that happened to me was learning how to not judge someone. Yeah. I was trained as a clinical psychologist by that time. So I had this certain level of a non judgmental approach when engaging with people. But when I went to the prison, I think my level of empathy went even deeper. To understand the circumstance in which certain crimes were committed, to feel that pain, and to actually to sit down and reflect that would I have done the same thing and what was stopping me. It was a moment of personal growth for me, and I didn't really know the world as much as I thought I did.
There must have been naysayers. There must have been people saying, like, can't you find a better place to do a project?
I was married at that time, and my mother just asked me, she says, I mean, are you sure you want to be doing this? um, and I said, yeah. I mean, what's wrong with it? And she said, no, no. I mean, she was very quick to say there's nothing wrong with it. But I think over a period of time, when I started talking to them about my experiences, they came around as well. For my parents, they were used to me doing something different all the time. When I was 18, actually even younger, I'd started, working in the slums. And again, it was courtesy Dr. Bedi. One of her nonprofits was working in the Yamuna Pushta area. And what they were doing there was something called the gully schools. So it is an unconventional school where you gathered the children together and you tried to give them some sort of informal education just to bring them up to a certain level, right? So that was the approach. I mean, as early as 17, 18, I'd started that. So I think my parents had gotten used to it by now.
I'm hearing Dr. Bedi and your mentor's name again and again.
Yes.
I'd love to unpack your journey and your relationship with her. What kind of a role has she played in your life? And, any other mentors in your journey? Because I think a huge factor for people to succeed is mentors in their journey.
I am a product of my mentors, in fact. And if you look at my journey, whether it's been my academic journey, where I had Dr. Barbara Wallace as my advisor, to my career, to my personal life, I've always been mentored by very strong women. And Dr. Bedi, she's my pillar. And I've had the pleasure and the honor of being mentored by her from a very young age. And at that time, she was a top cop. So everybody knew her. But I think that one meeting with her and then starting to volunteer with her, getting to know her better. And I've known her since I was 18. And I think I've seen her evolve as well. And I've learned from her experiences vicariously. And I remember her telling me so many things at a very young age, which at that time made no sense to me. So when we reconnected after I came back, and she asked me to become her OSD when she was the lieutenant governor, I've actually spent mornings trying to explain to her. I said, oh, you remember you said this to me? She's like, I've forgotten. And I used to quote the exact time and place when she had told me certain things. And I'm like, you know what? I understand it now. I didn't understand it then. I didn't understand why you were saying certain things then, but I understand it now. So the one thing which she told me very early on, and I used to wonder, why is she even saying this to me? And which now resonates very deeply with me is that, when I came back from the US, I was leaving my marriage and I came back and I remember I reached out to her saying that, this is what is happening in my life and I just wanted to update you and I'm going to be back. And she was very, calm about it. And she spoke with me and she said, doesn't matter. Life has its challenges. You try and see how you can work it out. And then she told me, she said, you must learn to appreciate solitude. And at that time I was wondering, so what is she saying? So, I came back, I moved back into my friend circle, picked up from where I'd left off. So I was very busy. There was no such thing as solitude and loneliness. Mm-hmm. The dots never connect at that time for me. But when I went to Bhutan and I experienced solitude in the real sense of the word, I had a choice there. And I remembered her conversation with me at that point. And I remember her telling me that, it's a choice that you will make, whether you want to be lonely or whether you want to appreciate your solitude and reflect and learn and grow. And that's pretty much what I did when I was in Bhutan. Those years of being away from the humdrum of a city life, I think I took that time to understand myself better. And there's this one very interesting incident I want to share with you. I'm not a morning person. Until date, I'm not a morning person. And I remember my first day at Rajnivas, a colleague of mine went up to her at about 7:30, and her question was, "Where's Amrita?" And my colleague said, "She's sleeping." She just said, "Okay." And then my colleague came back. And when I woke up and I'd surfaced and had my breakfast, she said, "Oh, ma'am was looking for you." I said, "What did she say?" She said, she didn't say anything. She just said, "Okay." I said, "Okay, then." That was a signal for me. So the next day onwards, till I was there, till the last day that I was with her, I used to be by her side at 6 a.m. in the morning. She would be exercising and I would be reading up, catching up, planning for the day with her. It was such an intense experience for me at that point, and a very hands-on leadership experience. I learned how to, deal and respond, not react to crisis, respond to crises. How do you handle things at scale? Public interaction. How do you have authentic public interaction? That's what I learned during that time as well.
Who were the other mentors?
So Dr. Wallace was another one. With her, it was at personal level. I think my growth into becoming a more mindful person started with her without me even realizing. So, it was not a very intentional mentorship, other than the fact that she was my advisor. That was something, of course, that was intentional and with focus. But her personal mentorship to me and how she became an inspiration was, again, something that just happened. And one of the things that she was famous for, and which I truly appreciate now, is the rigor that she's instilled in me as a researcher. And I'm sure a lot of academic mentors do that. But, she was particular to the point that she would notice if a full stop or a period was not in the right place. So that kind of rigor and being detail-oriented is something that I learned from her, which has held me in very good stead in any assignment that I've taken up. And I think the second thing that really made a big difference as far as she's concerned is, she gave us a mantra. She used to hold a boot camp for us in January to kind of make sure that we're, focusing in the direction of our PhDs. And during that boot camp, literally, we were not allowed to leave. We had to finish X amount of chapters or rewritings or whatever we had to do. She assigned each one of us work, and she was there herself. And the mantra was like, "I am calm, centered, and balanced." Did not make sense to me at that point. I think my mindset and my approach to life was very different. But that was my first experience at trying to be mindful. And I think today we need this more than ever before. That, you keep telling yourself you're calm, centered, and balanced, and you can take on anything. So, yeah.
With hindsight, we think of these things way more than...
Always, yes. So whenever I used to recount to Dr. Bedi, I remember you telling me this then. And thank you for teaching me. She says, I want to thank you for being such a good learner and for remembering it now and being able to apply it. To me, that's something more beautiful than you telling me that I taught you this.
I want to shift gears. I know you spoke to me earlier about Mr. Arun Kapoor and your association with him. So talk to us about the opportunity to work in Bhutan.
Thank you for bringing this up. It is something which is very close to my heart. So meeting Mr. Kapoor was a chance opportunity. I was at a charity lunch and I'd just returned from Puducherry. My assignment had got over and I was lamenting about the fact that, we are not doing enough in the field of education, especially since, one of the things we used to do in Puducherry was do spot checks in schools to see what is the quality of education and what do we need to kind of do to help improve it. And at that time, I remember the NEET exam was only offered in English. And I remember meeting with one child and asking her, "What is it that you aspire to be?" And she said that I want to be a nurse, but she couldn't even spell the word nurse properly. And that's when I discovered, the fact that, we've given aspirations to our children, but we're not providing them with the means to achieve those aspirations. And the level of frustration, I'm anticipating it still, that there will be such a deep level of frustration in our kids because you've shown them the world, but you haven't shown them the steps to achieve and get to that world. And I was speaking so passionately at this lunch that there was this couple and they said, you seem to want to do something in education. Have you met with Arun Kapoor? So I said, no, I've heard a lot about him, but I've not had the privilege of meeting him. And their son was the head boy of Vasant Valley. And so they said, oh, you know what? Let me ask our son to help connect you. And their son reached out. He connected Mr. Kapoor and I via email. And I wrote to Mr. Kapoor And I was told by everyone that, look, he's a very busy guy. He's traveling to Bhutan very often. We don't know whether he'll be in town. So be prepared not to hear back from him for quite some time. I wrote an email, and within 15 minutes, I got a reply saying, why don't you come and see me? So I was like, okay, I'm going to clear up all my schedule. Whatever I'm doing, I'm just going to drop it all and go and meet with him. And it was a 45-minute meeting, Enma, and it just changed my life completely. And I came out of that meeting saying, I'm going to work with him and I'm going to learn from him now. He's going to be my mentor. And that was 2019, I think January. And it took me that entire year to get hired into his team. I got other offers, and my parents kept asking me, why is it that you're not accepting this great offer? I'm like, because you know what? I'm going to work with Mr. Kapoor now.
So what happened that day? What changed things?
The way he approached education, it just resonated so deeply with me. And his vision for a society where people think not just about themselves, but also about society at large, and to see that being translated, I mean, they were well on their way to achieve that at the Druk Gyalpo's Institute. And, they finished their teacher education. So for me, it was like, okay, I need to be a part of this and I need to learn from this experience. And I never looked back. January 2020, 21st January 2020, I landed in Bhutan. It was a Tuesday, I can't forget. And that's it. There was no looking back for the next 4 years. He just brought us all together. And with him, I think what I learned the most was, one of my key takeaways, like I said, was how do you work together as a team? The collective power of a team. And very unconventional, right? So, when you talk about team, there's usually a team leader. We were a very flat organization. He was the leader and he reported to His Majesty the King. So the flatness of the organization really changed my thinking. Taking responsibility, not just for my work, but my colleagues' work without complaining about that extra load coming in. That whole approach to life was very different because of the cultural context, of course, but also because Mr. Kapoor, he created the team that way.
So moving from the fast-paced environment of Puducherry to the serene landscapes of Bhutan must have been such a major shift. So, talk to us, how did the work culture and the challenges compare and contrast? And what were the lessons you encountered along the way, expected or unexpected?
So the contrast was profound. So in Puducherry, everything was, high-paced, fast, with quick decision-making, responding to different sets of crises, if at all, or just responding to situations, right? And so you have to be prepared for everything. And then I moved to Bhutan, where the pace of life is very different, right? So I want to share an experience with you about my first few days. So, when I was preparing to leave for Bhutan, I asked my mother to accompany me. And the logic was that, okay, Mom, you're going to set up home for me while I go to work like that evening or that afternoon. So I land on a Tuesday. It was too dark by the time. What I didn't realize was that it gets really dark in the mountains in the winters. So there was no question of going to work at that point. But the next day I was asked to go to the capital, Thimphu, for my paperwork. And then I asked this colleague of mine saying that, okay, or how long will this process take and how soon can I start? So he just looked at me very quizzically saying, what is it that you want to do? So I said, I want to meet with people. I want to meet so-and-so. There was a colleague. I said, I want to meet with her. So would she be available? Where does she sit? So he says, that colleague of ours is currently on leave. This was Wednesday. So I said, okay, can I meet with so-and-so? And I want to ask a few questions about the culture, get an understanding. That colleague of ours is traveling for another colleague's wedding. So in my head, I'm sitting and thinking, what am I doing here? I was here all set to kind of, hit the ground running, want to start working right away. And I was used to working a 7-day week, right? 7 days, 24 hours. That was normal. So I asked him, how do I spend my time? Take it easy. Get to know the country. Huge, huge shift. And I think over the 4 years that I was, a part of that team, I learned how to be more respectful of mindfulness and of space, making sure that, we move at the pace that the other person is comfortable with, not losing sight of the goal. but respecting So it was never, not that Puducherry was an imposition, but Puducherry was a different pace altogether.
Yeah, right. And we always think that we are only working if we are really doing something which is high pace and high stress.
And we associate that with growth.
Exactly, yeah.
Whereas what Bhutan taught me was that growth doesn't have to be about pace and speed. It can be depth and sustainability that you look at. So that was the contrast in my learning and my understanding.
Awesome. So let's talk about His Majesty.
Oh my God. He's a visionary. I mean, I'm inspired by a lot of people, but I come from a democratic background. You think differently, right? You approach life very differently. But His Majesty, the Fifth King, is really, truly an epitome of steward leadership to me. In today's day and age, the way he feels for his people is something that I really deeply respect. I was in Bhutan during COVID, and the country was completely locked down. So anybody in the education field was considered a frontline worker. We were, of course, given all the privilege of receiving the vaccinations well in advance of the rest of the population. Even amongst faculty, we couldn't step out of our own cottages to meet people. And at that time, as and when His Majesty gave us an audience, we would get to know, not from him, of course, he's, the king, but we learned about how, he was patrolling the borders with his head of army and everyone, making sure that the borders are secure. And to me, it was like, he doesn't really need to do this. He's the king. Mm-hmm. He can command people to do this. But for him to actually be out there at such a vulnerable time, and he just had a new baby. So, you're sitting and thinking, oh gosh, he's got a new baby and he's now stepping out because he understands his role. And I think what really blew my mind away was the fact that in the middle of the pandemic, His Majesty actually took this arduous trek to one of the remotest parts of Bhutan, along with the Prime Minister and a team of medical professionals, to make sure that the vaccine reached that remote part of his country and to make sure that his people there were safe. So those are the kind of things that make you say that, if he can do it, the least that I can do is what I'm asked to do, what is expected of me.
Wow. I'm just wondering about all these inspiring leaders in your journey. And therefore, how did you create your own leadership style? And what's your vision for, since you said how you want to leave a legacy behind?
So one way of leaving a legacy behind is that your children take your work forward. I think for me, the most important piece was how am I remembered? And I think my realization, because of all the wonderful experiences where my mentors really helped me become who I am, I realized that, I want to be a person, a leader who understands their team well and responds to their needs, right? So that they have a chance and opportunity to grow. Just like I was given an opportunity to grow, I want to create that same ecosystem for them. The other thing that I experienced when I was in Bhutan was this wonderful concept of Genku. If I were to try and explain this in simple terms, it would just mean that, you think about the community as a whole and your position in the community. So you don't think selfishly just about yourself. I've seen it at scale in Bhutan when we had people volunteer to do certain things. But that was, His Majesty and his effect on people. But if I were to kind of bring it down to a smaller scale on a day-to-day basis, then let me share this example of a colleague of mine. So, we were living in one part of the campus and we had to drive up to go to the main school campus for a class that we had to deliver. And I remember sitting in my colleague's car because I didn't drive in the mountains. And, suddenly I saw this rock on the road and she was driving an SUV, so I knew we could easily go over it. And I saw her pull over. So I said, Sange, what are you doing? So she says, just give me 1 minute. And she went out, she picked up the rock and she put it on the side of the road. So when she came back to the car, I said, okay, what did you just do? She says, you know what? Novin, who was another colleague of ours, his car is very low. It's definitely going to get scratched at the bottom and it's going to affect his car and he won't be able to drive up again. And I was sitting and thinking, wow, like I did not even think of that. But just her ability to think in that direction was such an eye-opener for me. And I was like, you know what? This needs to happen more in the world. And how do we make it happen more?
Love that. So let's go to the present day, Amrita. And yeah, I think all this is culminating into your huge responsibility at GD Goenka now, right?
Mhm.
So talk to us about your vision. What is your plan in GD Goenka and how are you going about it?
Oh, what is my plan in GD Goenka? Yes, I want to make, I want to create a system of education that helps children to become good citizens of a country, to think not just of personal growth, but also of their position and their place in society and the world. So, how do you make that happen? You try and contextualize education to suit their needs. And that's pretty much what I'm working on right now. I like to call myself the keeper or the custodian of the Goenkan philosophy of education. It's something that I'm articulating based on the experiences of the 400 plus faculty that I have in just the company owned schools and university, and to see how that then translates into the curriculum and gets transacted so that when a child from GD Goenka graduates, you can tell them apart. That's my purpose over here. It's about how do we change the mindset of the people. I think that's what the journey is going to be like. It's not a short-term change. It's definitely going to be a longer-term change but I think that's what the role is, right? When you're a custodian of a philosophy of education, you have to see how can you bring about that long-term mindset change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And also to be an organization where learning is a given, you know?
So the same mindset you spoke about for yourself.
Yeah, because if you don't have that growth mindset or that mindset to continually learn, there's no question of you being able to evolve. You have to be responsive. You can't wait for things to happen and then react to them and say, oh, now I need to deal with it this way. How do you start anticipating change? It's when you start thinking and learning constantly.
I'm just thinking about even Manthan, right? Or Sehed. Like, I think what you did in those movies is just mindset change.
It is.
Like, in those 10 minutes of that movie, I could see that, change in you and change in those women. So I'm thinking about multiple things, right? Uh, Building future generations, building mindsets, building a growth mindset. So not just doing it in your team, but also making sure you're doing it amongst the students or the different schools, given the kind of exposure this generation has, the kind of noise in the world today.
Thank you. You've said the right thing. There's a lot of noise in the world today. So how do you sift the noise?
Yeah, right.
And, focus on what is essential. So it's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach. It's not just students that I'll have to work with.
Not at all.
It's as much my faculty, is as much the ecosystem to be able to create an environment where people thrive and where people also understand that success is how you define it, not how I define it. Because success to me may mean very differently compared to what you think is success, So I think recognizing that and accepting that while also learning how to challenge yourself. So keeping that pace of learning, keeping that approach is what is important.
So, given that the group has been around for so many years,
30.
The word which is coming to my mind is culture, Amrita.
Yes.
Right, from a leader perspective, right?
Yes.
So, what is your approach to culture? And I'm just wondering, what kind of challenges are you anticipating as you build, strengthen, and maybe in certain ways redefine the culture?
I am redefining the culture because, for you to move together as a group of institutions, that by itself is a cultural change, right?
Yes.
So yes, we are looking to build that common culture, and each person has their own life experiences and their own backstories impacting how they understand certain things. So bringing everyone to the same page is the first aspect of culture building that we're going to focus on. But I think the most important thing to build culture is to build trust. When you know and when you have this feeling that, yes, I can trust what this person or what this organization is saying they will do, that's when I think the mindset shift starts.
And I'm also wondering, given that you joined the group so recently, you must have faced a lot of skepticism, among stakeholders. Like you're an outsider in a sense, right? And you have to become that insider, and it takes a while to traverse that journey.
So yeah, I'm fairly new as compared to a whole load of other people who've been working with the group. Can I say that I've built trust with a few of my teachers? Yes, for sure. How did I do this? I think having their back when they needed me, making sure that I stood ground for them, being there for them personally when they were facing crises, making an effort to be there for them, reaching out, walking the corridors, being there for the teachers when parents are around, handling discipline, ensuring that there is discipline and respect for my teachers. That was some of the first few steps that I took. So I have an open door policy. Whether you're a student, whether you're a teacher, whether you are a staff member, you walk in. If I'm sitting with someone, then, I will always let you, we'll figure out a time that we can meet, but I'm accessible to all. So I think accessibility, the ability to listen patiently and to try and find a solution. So I won't just say that I will do this. They know that if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to see it through. Or I normally say, okay, let me see what I can do about this, or let me see how I can approach this differently. So I think those are trust building measures that you take.
Yeah.
And once you have people's trust, I feel that you can move forward.
I want to shift gears. You made the courageous choice to walk away from your marriage. But before that, you made even in my mind, a more difficult choice of giving up such a prestigious scholarship. So I'm just wondering, with hindsight, what would you do differently, if at all? And how has it influenced your approach to choices?
So I think the choices that I've made have been incredibly formative in shaping me to be the person that I am today. So, when you ask me, do I regret that decision? No, because I feel that there was a learning there from that also. If I had accepted it, I would have been a different person today, right? So I like who I am today. I like my experiences. I've gone through some incredible challenges in life to become who I am today. But I would like to say that one of the key learnings for me in this is the fact that, you learn to take responsibility of the consequences of your choice. You learn to accept that the choice that you have made is going to have a certain learning associated with it. And that's going to shape you to be the person who you are. That has been one of my key takeaways from life in general,
So you did not walk out feeling like a victim. You just feel like a winner in a sense, somebody who learned.
Walking out of my marriage was a choice that I made, not my husband. And it stemmed from the fact that I felt that, we were two different people. We were not flourishing together in this relationship anymore. So no, I didn't feel like a victim at all. And it was a very amicable parting that we had,
And giving up the scholarship.
I made that choice because I wanted to be with my, at that time, boyfriend. And it was important. So to give that up was a choice that I made. It was a decision that I made, and I took responsibility for it. It was important at that point because for me, my relationship was more important at that time. So I think most of my decisions have been based on how am I placing importance. What I wanted to get across was this point that, there's no point in sitting down and crying that something has happened. I don't want victimhood for any one of us. What I want is for us to take responsibility, take ownership of that process and say that, this is something that I have chosen to do because I know this is not going to work out for me.
Thank you for sharing that, Amrita. It's always a choice between responsibility versus blame. And that's what I'm hearing you talk about. And I think that's a perspective which is so powerful. Not everyone is able to operate from that positive mindset. So you remember you and I spoke last time about the subtle conditioning many women face around seeking approval,
Hmm.
right? And I think that's where all the challenges happen. So how do you think we can change this narrative?
Okay, that's going to be a very complex process because so many of us, like you said, have grown up with these unspoken expectations of us, the way we have to be seeking approval or the way we have to behave in a certain way, or even how much we expect from our own lives is something that is so driven by, societal conventions, right? Of what is okay for women to do or what is okay for, women from conventional families to do. There are two things that I would like to talk about over here in terms of changing that narrative. First, I think as women, we need to stop othering women because the minute we start doing that, we are creating a divide.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we are taking away the space for women to be able to be themselves, for them to get respect for who they are. So we need to recognize when we are othering others. Yeah. And we need to figure out how do we create those safe spaces for women to just be themselves in their full form and with their own diversity, their own qualities, and just appreciating them for who they are, making it safe for them to be themselves. And I think that's where we will put that whole, seeking external validation, that whole process, we'll put a stop to it. We'll put a check on it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we start a movement? How do we start a movement where we build those spaces where we let each woman flourish, be herself, and be appreciated for being herself? And I'm getting goosebumps just saying this to you because I would love to be a part of this movement. And I think the second thing that we need to bring about as a change process is involving men in this conversation, because they can't be left out of this conversation.
Absolutely. They are part of the journey, yeah.
Exactly, because they are the fathers, the husbands, and the brothers, and the boyfriends, and the husbands who are part of this whole system. And they're the ones who we seek that validation from. So how do they come into this conversation? How do we create spaces where men become a part of this conversation? That's the important piece that we need to work on.
It's not a men versus a women thing. It's about men and women thing.
Exactly.
Right? And thank you for sharing that. I hope sooner than later, even Atlanta Diaries is able to create this movement where we are able to redefine this code. So Amrita, looking back with all the experiences that you've gathered, what would you say is the biggest life lesson you've learned? And if you had to offer your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Resilience. I think my biggest life lesson is that resilience and self-belief can really carry you through some challenges. And it's an ongoing learning journey. You can never experience enough to be able to say that, I'm a resilient person, because life will throw some challenge at you and you need to know how to deal with it at that point of time also. If I were to give my younger self a piece of advice, I would just add one aspect. I think I've been very hard on myself, all along. And I think my experience in Bhutan has really shaped my understanding of compassion. And the one thing that I would tell myself is that learn to be compassionate with yourself. Be kind to yourself. And it's okay to be kind and not have all the answers all the time. So just learn and move forward.
I love it. I'm very tempted to end this with a tribute to your amazing grandmom.
Oh.
And I remember you spoke about how you've created a scholarship in your grandmom's name to honor her strength and values.
Mm-hmm.
Share with us what inspired this initiative.
So, my grandmother was, she was ahead of her times. There's no question in my mind about that. But I think the one thing that she used to stand for at all points of time was education, especially of women. And I guess that's where the influence is. There's a very subliminal influence in my life about how education plays such a powerful role. But she always said, "Pad lik jao," and she was the one who was, paying for her staff's kids to go to school and to study, because she realized that that could be a game changer for them. And so I set up this scholarship in her name because of her drive in shaping me and making sure that I went through my education process, So it's a very unique scholarship, by the way. It's for married women, although that's not something that I'm very strict about. But yes, when I was 30 and I went for my second master's, I discovered that I wasn't eligible for a whole bunch of scholarships for two reasons. A, my age, and B, I was a married woman. And it used to really upset me that I wasn't eligible for scholarships, especially since, in India, at that age, you are written off in terms of education. But in the United States, you're just starting your learning journey.
Oh, true.
And so I came back and promised myself one day that, the minute I'm a little settled and I can do this, I'm going to start a scholarship in my grandmother's name for married women to go back to a second career, to go back in their learning journeys, knowing that, this is the spirit with which my grandmother made sure that we all went forward. I've, I think, 2 scholars so far, but solid 2 scholars so far. It's a young scholarship, but I'm hoping to take it forward.
Beautiful way to end the conversation, Amrita. Thank you very much for doing this. And thank you for promoting things which you feel so strongly about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me here. And I look forward to working together with you on that movement. Let's talk about how I want to change the narrative. I want to create those spaces with you, Enma. I look forward to doing that.
Awesome. Thank you. Looking forward to it too, Amrita.
Wonderful.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, do hang on for just one more minute. I have a request for you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Atlanta Diaries on Spotify, iTunes, or whichever platform you follow. Do join us in our mission to empower and inspire by sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It will be great if you can share on the social media platforms you follow, be it LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or any other. Please leave a review or rating on iTunes or Spotify. It really helps us reach a wider audience. Lastly, I wanted to share with you that many of my coaching clients and listeners have created a cheat sheet with their key takeaways from the episodes. I invite you to consider jotting down 1 or 2 key takeaways as you navigate your amazing journey. Have a wonderful rest of the day and see you next week for another inspiring journey on Atlanta Diaries.